My name's Shirley Mann, and this is my novel, Lily's War. Chapter 1. Manchester, 1942. The knitting was the last straw. Lily cast off the end stitch, measured the uneven grey sock against its partner, and made a decision. There had to be something better she could do towards the war effort than knitting irregular socks for soldiers. She tried to pull them to the same length, but gave up, throwing them in the knitting basket in disgust. I just hope that Tommy's got one leg shorter than the other, she muttered to herself. Lily looked around at the morning room of her parents' terraced house in Manchester. It was the only vaguely warm room in the house, with the black range struggling to keep an ember alive in a pathetic reminder of the blazing fires of pre-war days. She fingered the tassels on the dark green damask tablecloth next to the armchair she was curled up in. So often as children, she and her brother Don had peered through them from the other side, hiding from the haunting cry of the rag and bone man. She'd been frightened then, but that was before she knew real fear. The room needed decorating. It looked as tired as the family did, she thought. The thermos was upright on a chair next to the table, standing to attention, waiting to be filled with tea at bedtime in case the sirens went off, forcing them to leave their warm beds to take refuge in the Anderson shelter in the garden. The pale cream blankets were on the chair next to it, neatly folded. The candles lay expectantly in their box, the matches on top. They were all becoming experts at this. It was the same story every night, waiting for the drone of the planes, wondering whether that night would be their last. "Mum," she called into the back kitchen. "Yes, dear," her mum replied, putting a tiny spoonful of valuable honey into the cake she was making. She'd saved all her rations for this cake, and she needed to concentrate. "I'm going to sign up." "Yes, dear." Lily went into the tiny cold room at the back of the house, pushing past her 13-year-old brother Don. Still in school uniform, he was hovering near the mixing bowl on the stone slab, dipping his finger in when his mother wasn't looking. "No, really, I'm going to volunteer. I'm fed up with just doing fire watch duty. If I don't do this by now, by next year it could all be over, and I'll have missed my chance." "Missed your chance to get killed, you mean?" Her dad appeared behind her, struggling as usual to light his pipe. "Everyone's already gone." Lily ignored him and held out her hand for the honey-smeared spoon. Her mother automatically handed it over the head of her disappointed son, and watched Lily lick the silver utensil free of every last vestige of honey. Lily's shoulder-length hair suddenly caught the late afternoon sun's rays, reflecting the golden shimmer from the liquid. Like many times recently, the tall, assured 19-year-old in front of Ginny took her breath away. She towered above her mother now, and Ginny noticed with pride how Lily's casual shirt, tucked into the waistband of a navy skirt, showed off her neat figure. It was a shame they couldn't buy her a new shirt, though, Ginny thought. The reputed darns and men's were becoming obvious. "No, Lily, you're doing well at liners. With everyone else gone, Mr. Spencer's relying on you more and more. You've got a real chance to make something of yourself. You've still got another year before you'd get called up." "I've already made something of myself," Lily said with a grin. "I was the back end of a horse on the Rush-Home Panto, 3 years on the run, remember? Well, no one can beat that for achievement." "War's ugly," her dad butted in, but didn't say any more. John Mullins was a great war veteran, whose memories of Gallipoli still gave him nightmares, details of which he'd never shared before, and he wasn't about to start now. John squeezed past the 3 members of his family and banged his pipe against the side of the Belfast sink to blot out the images that came unbidden. Meanwhile, Lily bounded out of the room, unwilling to brook any argument. Ginny Mullins wiped her hands on the faded dishcloth and went over to her husband. She placed a tense hand on the darned elbow of his grey sweater. "She's 19, a grown woman. She could be married by now," John said, looking down at his diminutive wife. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, trying to convince himself as well as his wife. "You won't stop her, you know you won't, and it's not like she's been safe here." He looked out meaningfully at the corrugated roof shelter that had been their flimsy defense against German bombs during the Blitz, when so many others had died. Lily dropped down into the armchair in the morning room and blew out a noisy sigh. She was good at filing, typing and invoicing, but when the ticker tapes came into the office sounding the death knell of yet another of Manchester liner's ships, she experienced frustration and anger. She would run her finger over the names of the lost as they came in, trying to find a connection with them, trying to send her strength to the injured and the families left behind. When she closed her eyes, she saw the heaving seas, grey pictures of listing ships, the spirals of smoke, and the sight of flailing sailors in the water. She'd failed to come to terms with a world that was no longer safe for her and for everyone she loved. All the security of a carefree childhood had been obliterated amidst air raids and streets that were reduced to unfamiliar rubble. Her journeys to work had made her a witness to the Home Guard, police and fire brigade frantically digging through flattened buildings while pale relatives stood by, chillingly silent in their fear and grief. She had too often heard the hushed tones in local shops as yet another family received the dreaded telegram. Lily tried to believe she was going to sign up for altruistic reasons, but she knew in her heart she was simply bored. In 1939, she'd just been allowed to go to dances, had started work, and had a wage coming in. She'd bought her first pair of kitten heels and was full of excitement about the future. But Hitler had other ideas. When she started at Liners, Lily had felt so important, bustling around the office, holding a clipboard and dominating the filing cabinets. But then, once all the young women in the typing pool joined up, she was left with bespectacled, well-meaning colleagues who spent the whole day discussing how to make the most out of an ounce of sugar. And worst of all, most of the young men had gone too, leaving Lily to partner one of her school friends, Roz or Hannah, at the occasional morale-boosting dances. Then, last week, when she was huddled with her family in the shelter, listening yet again to the ominous drone of the planes above her beloved city, she noticed the habitual shivering had stopped. She was no longer afraid. She was ready. Chapter 2. Ginny looked crossly at the envelope on the mat marked, "On His Majesty's Service." It was all so quick. Lily was too young. She pushed her grey hair away from her horn-rimmed spectacles, fingered the letter for a moment, but then reluctantly called up the stairs. "I think it's here, Lily." Lily stopped brushing her hair and slowly placed the beveled silver hairbrush on her walnut dressing table and rearranged the yellowing lace cloth under it. She ran downstairs, almost slipping in her stockinged feet on the threadbare carpet. "Careful, love, you'll break your ankle," her mother said automatically. "Well, I never have I?" Lily gave her mum a quick hug before taking the brown envelope from her. Lily raced back up the stairs to her bedroom. It was a sanctuary that had comforted her all her life. She needed a moment's calm to erase the nagging guilt brought on by the wan expression on her mother's face at the bottom of the stairs. Lily had always been the organizer in the family, the bossy one, her father would say. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she slid slightly on the silky pale lemon eiderdown and felt her knees give way. Raising her chin, she sat down more firmly and slid her finger under the seal. The letter was very polite. It thanked her for her application, gave her a date for a medical, and informed her she'd be interviewed about her education and schooling, so she could choose the area that most suited her abilities. Later, once the blackout curtains had been pulled shut and the black iron kettle had boiled, the family sat with their customary cup of Lyons tea and a jug of condensed milk. The letter was on the table in front of them, speaking volumes with its black type. "Well, the army's out," Lily told her parents, prodding the poker into the 3 pieces of coal on the range fire. "I just look terrible in khaki. I think you need a relative to get into either the Air Force or the Navy." She paused, dredging up information she'd heard at the Red Cross Centre. "But do you think the fact that Paul is in the RAF could get me in there?" She looked round for confirmation, but none came. Unsure, but wanting to fill the silence, she tentatively said, "I think you can ask for the RAF if you've got a relative in it. So is a cousin a near enough relative? So that's it. Air Force, here I come." Triumphant, she sat back to gauge the impact of her pronouncement. "Anything but munitions," her dad replied, reaching over to pick up a precious biscuit from the round tin on the table. The painting of the thatched cottage on the front reminded him of the England they were all fighting for. "I'll not have you working in a factory. We didn't send you to a good school like Loretto for that." John Mullins was a printer at the Manchester Guardian in Cross Street. He'd worked nights for as long as Lily could remember. Early morning she'd come down in her woolly dressing gown. He was always there, carefully rolling up old newspapers for the range, his fingers black from the printing ink. The latest editions would be on the table. Lily loved knowing she was the first in the street to find out the latest news, and felt her father's job gave her a superior inside knowledge of world affairs. In the morning light they would discuss the day's headlines over a cup of tea before he went up to bed in his upside-down day. She gave her dad an affectionate pat on his arm, leaving it there for a second. He smiled at her. "I know, lass, but munitions is dirty work, and you'd look awful in a boiler suit. It's a long way from an office job at Liners." "I'm a junior assistant," Lily said. "That must make me top brass material at least." "That settles it then," she said, not pausing for breath. "I'll tell them I choose the Air Force. As I'm volunteering, they've said they'll consider any preferences I have, but they're not going to let me fly a plane, and I'm no good at maps, so what else can I do?" She picked up the letter and scanned it for the umpteenth time. "Mrs. Cook's daughter's gone in the WAFs," her mother said, pouring out a drop more tea for herself, and adding the sweet mixture from the small flowered china jug. "She looks very smart in her uniform when I saw her at the Co-op. And there's all them lovely pilots. You might meet one of them and—" "Nah," her dad interrupted. "She'll marry Danny when he comes back. You mark my words. Any more of them biscuits, Ginny? The tin's empty." He shook it and passed it to her. Ginny headed towards the pantry, pausing in the doorway to smile at her daughter, who'd sat upright in the chair at her father's words. "Huh, what? That full of himself smarty pants? I don't think so." Lily cocked her head to one side. It was a struggle these days to recall Danny, the young sales rep who used to perch on the edge of her desk, pretending to need her wind-up pencil sharpener. She'd been so surprised when, during her first week at Liners, he'd walked through the door carrying his coat nonchalantly over his shoulder. She knew him immediately. 3 years earlier, for an interminable 6 months, Lily had been subjected to her friend Roz's detailed description of his twinkling eyes and his unruly black hair. He would often call round for Will, Roz's older brother, on the way to junior orchestra when Lily was there. But with a 2-year age difference, Roz and her friend were suitably ignored by the older and much more mature boys, and Roz's crush went unreciprocated. But on that Monday morning at Liners, Danny had immediately recognized Lily, and from then on he took it upon himself to help her settle in, giving her endless advice about how to deal with the erratic water boiler in the kitchen, how to use the teleprinter, and how to avoid the miserable Miss Khan. She put up with his advice for about 2 weeks, until she told him she was perfectly capable and would manage on her own now, thank you very much, at which point he asked her out for a date. And if you want to know more about Lily and Danny's war and how they struggled to get together, then you can buy Lily's War in Tesco's, on Amazon, Waterstones, and other good bookshops online at the moment, or in Tesco's itself. I hope you enjoy it.